welcome to Living with Multiple Sclerosis. My name's Shona Dobe and I'm the MS Community Advisor for the Wairarapa. Now today I've got Nick Brandon with me. Now a few of you may have recalled that a little while ago I did talk to Nick. Really, Nick is an artist and a musician living here in Masterton. Now I made such a muck up with my last, because Nick was fairly early on and when I was just learning which buttons to press, and I managed to put music over most of his interview. So today I'm going to put it all right because I think he's got some amazing things to talk about. So welcome back, Nick, and thank you for giving me a second chance.
No problem, Shona.
So, Nick, do you want to tell me about Nick Brandon, the artist?
Okay. I'd always had an interest in art since I was a child, so I was wasn't what I did for a living, but it was something I was interested in, and I did a bit of dabbling in my spare time, and I'm certainly always interested to go and view art at galleries, especially if there's something, a touring exhibition, perhaps from overseas. And whenever we've travelled, we've made a habit of going to art galleries in the main cities around the world where, you know, the quality of the exhibitions is very high and you see stuff you wouldn't normally see. And what's always striking is the difference between having looked at a painting in a book, a reproduction of it in a book, and then the actual painting in real life. And it's always quite a different experience to see it in real life. So I was doing some adult, night classes in painting, and prior to being diagnosed with MS, and then, of course, once, even while I was still working, but knew I had it, I was still quite keen to keep going with my art, and perhaps a little more interested in being a bit more focused on it. And of course, once I stopped working, I had to fill my life, my hours, with something constructive and something that interested me, and art definitely does all of that. And I think it also helps me as a coping mechanism with mental health and so forth. So I think I'm very fortunate that I've got something like that to use up time in the day, or not use it up, but to fill the hours, and also to just stimulate me a little bit. And it's really good to have conversations with other artists who I really do enjoy meeting and socialising with. So I also, when I got sick, I decided that after a lifetime of being a music fan, and particularly live music, my biggest regret was never learning to play a musical instrument. And so I decided, right, this is an opportunity I can't pass up. So I've been learning to play the guitar for about 4 years now.
Right.
And I get a little bit better inch by inch, but it's much harder when you're a fully grown adult to learn the coordination and the just the skills that your brain's, even without the MS, anyone's brain is a little bit less plastic and able to cope with new concepts. So those two things really help me to while away the hours, but also give me something to sort of focus on and aim at. So excuse me, let's go back to your art. What's your medium? So is it mainly just painting, or? To begin with, it was painting, but then the tutor I was the art tutor I went to said to me, I really think printmaking might be something you'd be interested in, looking at the way you paint. And I didn't really know what that meant, printmaking. I thought it was just a way of making a copy of an artwork. But in fact, as I've found, it's a much more in-depth, and there's just so many different methods of making prints. And so I went to an introductory course and loved it, and I've never looked back. But I have to say, at the moment, I haven't painted for well over a year, but I'm feeling the need to do some painting, so I think it will come back. But I've been really enjoying the printmaking and new experimental techniques that I've been trying to incorporate. It's endlessly diverting. Let me just put it that way.
Right. Okay. So when you say printmaking, what does that entail?
Yes. I should have said I mainly use woodcut and lino cut as the methods, but I'm also trying a new technique called carborundum printing, where you mix carborundum grit with a gel medium and you paint it onto the plate. So that gives you a more painterly kind of finish look. So it does have some appeal to me. Anyway.
Now, I do have to ask, because I have no idea what it is. What is
carborundum?
Yeah.
It's a fine grit that is, it's like very fine lines.
Okay.
It's used by a glass artist to grind glass. In fact, I got the grit I'm using from a glass artist in Wanganui, who buys in bulk and then sells small quantities to artists. So it's you could go to a black sand beach, west coast, a bucket of it for free. But yeah, I have 3 different grades of it. So there's coarse, grey, medium.
So then printing paper, I guess.
Eventually you're inking up onto that plate you've made,
right?
And with the use of press, throwing the ink onto a paper, and that's how you make the final result. And if you use a good base for your plate, you'll get 10 or 15 or 20 images of the same. So you can do editions, limited editions of the same work.
Right. So is it only ink that you print with?
Yes.
Right,
And
okay.
the only choice there is whether it's water-based or oil-based.
And what's the difference to the quality of the finish?
I think most artists would agree that oil-based inks give you the best finish, but they are not so easy to clean up. Environmentally, they're also a bit less desirable, so I mostly use water-based inks.
Right.
But there's some really good quality water-based inks which give you almost as good as oil-based results. So, yeah.
And so, excuse me, where do you get your inspiration from?
Well, I was just pondering that very question the other day, because what's been bugging me is the state of our human habitation of this planet has reached a level that is no longer sustainable, and yet we seem to be headlong pushing for more development and more raping and pillaging, and no one seems to be having the slightest qualms about that. They will in it for whatever they personally can gain, and we need to really do something right now and start reversing the damage we've done if we're going to survive. And I just cannot believe that there are people in power in various governments around the world, including our own, who are still pursuing a develop and take all the natural minerals, the natural wealth that we have in the ground and exploit it. That's so last century thinking. We've got to change, and so that's really been exercising my art as well. So I'm feeling like without actually spelling it out in words, and is really just trying to capture that that sense of urgency that we need to have towards looking after our planet. So yeah.
So it's helping you make decisions about what mediums you use, as well as the topics.
Yes, well, yeah, I think that one leads to the other, really.
Right.
If you care about the environment, you're going to think twice about what materials you're going to use, and what happens to the leftover ink or whatever's. So you can't just throw stuff out anymore. There's no out anymore.
Right.
We can't keep filling landfills with our rubbish. We've got to stop buying cheap imported goods that last for 2 minutes and then go on the scrap heap. There's a whole raft of things that each individual can use and can do to make a difference, and I think that's the only way we can do it, because people get into power in governments, they are not interested in helping people like the ordinary people of the world to achieve a balanced lifestyle. So I think you just got to do it yourself, and eventually the revolution will come.
Oh, well, great words there, Nick. Now, look, we're going to go to our first piece of music. Now, Nick, perhaps you could introduce it for us.
Yeah, sure. This is a track from a duo called the Handsome Family. It's a husband and wife or partner duo. He writes the music and she writes the lyrics, and they're pretty successful, in my opinion. But the track is called Far From Any Road, and some of you who were fans of the television series True Detective will recognise it as the theme from, I think it was the first of the True Detective series. So
oh, great. Well, let's listen to it now.
From the dust
It's a dangerous game.
from the dusty mesa, a looming shadow grows, hidden in the branches of the poison creosote.
And welcome back. Thanks for that, Nick. That was a great track. Now, for this section, I'd really like to talk about Nick, the man with MS. So, do you want to tell me a little bit about your MS? When were you diagnosed?
I was diagnosed at the end of 2011, but I had been experiencing a range of symptoms probably for 10 years before that, mostly fairly minor things like a temporary loss of vision in one eye, which eventually came back. I was ripping out the toes of my shoes regularly. That was because I wasn't lifting my feet high enough off the ground when I was walking, but I was still running at that stage. I've been a distance runner most of my life, so I was still managing to run perfectly well and do all the other physical activities that I enjoyed doing, including riding a motorcycle, going hunting, tramping, getting into the outdoors, that sort of thing. So it wasn't until halfway through a marathon I tripped and fell and landed face down that I thought something was not quite right, but it was another 12 months after that before I finally got a diagnosis. And that was a bit accidental as it was, because I went to see an orthopaedic surgeon about my lower back, which I'd had trouble with for most of my adult life. Luckily he was well across lots of different medical conditions, and he almost immediately said, "I think you've got MS, but we'll run and get a MRI to prove it." So that was a interesting visit to the doctor.
Yeah, I bet there was a bit of a shock. Did you know much about MS? Had you heard it?
Yeah, I did know a little bit about it because a very good friend of mine had got it when he was in his early 30s. And his situation was quite severe. He was in a wheelchair within about 5 or 6 years. So I knew a little about it, but not a great deal. I knew he was very sensitive to heat, and I knew that it eventually stopped him working, so I had some knowledge, but not a lot.
Right. And given that your only experience of someone with MS was that they had, which their rate of illness was quite accelerated, that must have meant that when you were diagnosed you were a little bit frightened. Would you say you're scared?
Definitely quite shattered by the news, but I immediately started reading up about it, of course, which is, with the modern internet, you can completely immerse yourself in that sort of thing. And everything I read tended to indicate that because I didn't get my diagnosis until quite late, that my progression would probably be quite slow, just based on hearsay, really. Not much, I don't think there's any clinical trials that will prove that, but the reality is that if you get it early, it seems to quite quickly, especially progressive forms of MS, which is what I have, either secondary or primary. It doesn't seem to matter which one it is, but different neurologists give you a different view. So I was a little apprehensive about what the future would hold, as you can imagine, but I was thinking, well, I've got through a big chunk of my life without it stopping me from doing things. Let's hope it's not too rapid a decline. So,
right.
Yeah.
Oh, great. And how did your family cope or react to it?
Well, I think everyone goes through the first phase of denial, and so the only person who knew was my wife. I didn't tell anyone else for at least 12 months. In fact, the only reason I probably did then was because we'd had a very hot, humid summer in Auckland, and I found that I was really struggling to deal with the heat and humidity, and it was obvious there was something not right about me. To anyone who knew me well, I was not able to walk very far without having to have a rest, and whereas before I'd have been leaping up the stairs faster than everyone else and racing somebody to the top, So it was then, once I started telling people, it was a different space. I was, I guess, in a sense relieved, but also it just felt like, okay, I've got to face up to this thing instead of just pretending it's not really happening. It is happening, and it's going to have some repercussions. So that it was at least 12 months after diagnosis that I really sort of thought, well, and at that stage I then started looking at things like diet and exercise and nutrition and meditation and lots of other things, because of course with progressive there is no drug therapy for it, so you're on your own basically. They can give you various band-aids to help treat some of the symptoms you've got, but there's nothing they can do to that has a clinical professional proof that it will make any difference. So I've been experimenting on myself for quite a while now with different things, and for instance a very big dose of simvastatin, 80 milligrams a day. So there's something to do with animal fats and the fact that simvastatin lowers those fats in the blood. Seems there's some connection there. I also take a drug called low-dose naltrexone, which is very good for your mental health because it tricks the brain into release hormones into your bloodstream, which I used to get naturally by running, but now I can't do that anymore. But so that's been interesting. In terms of mental health, I'm really glad I've got onto that. And the long-term prognosis is that it may actually help with reversing some of the damage to the nerves that have been attacked by whatever causes MS.
Right, yeah. Well, that's great. Actually, we might stop here for another music break, and after the music, I'd just like to ask you, Nick, about cognitive changes or anything that you've noticed, with yourself in that way. So do you want to introduce us to the next track?
Okay, the next track is by I think he's an American, Steve Gunn. He's a really good guitar player. I have seen him live. He's really quite extraordinary. And I just love this track because the video that he developed for it has him riding a motorcycle in the country, and then it breaks down, and he's trying to figure out how to fix it and get it going again. So, and he's got a mate called Ancient Jules who knows everything about motorbikes. So it's got a lot of interest for me. Anyway,
right. Let's listen to it now. Well, welcome back. That was a great track, Nick. Thanks for that. Now, before the break, I said I wanted to talk to you a little bit more about any cognitive changes you may have had with your MS. What would you like to say, if anything?
Yes, I think it's important because when I was diagnosed, all of the literature and all of the medical advice was about coping with the physical changes, and I'd actually come to terms with the fact that over time I would gradually lose mobility, and I certainly wouldn't be able to run and jump and carry on like I had before, and I'd sort of reached some peace with that. But what no one ever mentioned was what was going to happen to me cognitively. It wasn't in any of the books I read. It wasn't in anything that I came across. In fact, it was only my friend who had it from a very early stage who said to me very early on, he said, you're going to find that your decision making is not the best, and he advised me to get some chemical help to keep me on an even keel as well. So that triggered a bit of investigation by me, and I did find that in fact that's a pretty common symptom that goes hand in hand. And my work life was all about judgment. It was about being able to understand people, grasp what they're saying, read their body language, understand, make on-the-fly judgment calls about whether they were spinning me a yarn or whether they were for real. And I was starting to lose that ability, and also memory was becoming extremely rough. And I could arrive at the office in the morning, people I worked with every day, and I couldn't remember their bloody names. And I'd have to get to my office and look at the phone list to remember. Mm-hmm. And that was really hard to deal with, I have to say. And eventually it stopped me working because I couldn't write reports reasonably quickly. It was a constant battle to remember. If I'd covered off a certain aspect, I'd have to go back and check. It would take me days to do something that took me a couple of hours, and eventually that just was not sustainable. I'd been self-employed up to the last 2 years of my working life, but I couldn't. And before I knew what I had gone to work for big companies because I couldn't generate enough income from my own endeavours, and so I didn't know there was something wrong. I just knew I wasn't as sharp as I used to be, and people got that vibe off me. Whatever, it just meant they didn't send me work, and so working for someone else gave me a little bit of a buffer, in that a lot of the work came directly in through their big organisations, but it still meant I was not performing at the level that I used to, and eventually I had to. Well, I eventually got the sack, which I laugh about now, but it was a bit of a shock and a horror at the time. Anyway, it all worked out in the end. Yeah. So yes,
but that would have been quite a distressing period for you.
Well, it was, and I think if the insurance company had been any more difficult, it might not have been a good outcome, because I was in a pretty dark place. But anyway.
And one of just sort of, and if you don't mind me asking, sort of linked to that, did you at any time sort of have depression with, that's often associated?
Yep, I absolutely. I probably should have said that right from the start, but definitely in that 10-year period when my symptoms were coming and going, various weird symptoms come and go, I was experiencing a mild level of depression, but generally I was able to cope with it. I had various coping mechanisms that involved physical activity like running or cycling, or just blowing the cobwebs out with a motorbike ride, or there were ways and means for me to cope with it without seeking chemical help. But certainly since having MS, and it does appear to be something that just goes hand in hand with the disease. It's not due to the fact that you dwell on what your future might be or anything like that. It's really there's some chemical relationship between the disease and
Yep.
mental health. So yeah.
Oh, well, look, we really appreciate your candor there. I know it must be really difficult. So let's go back to the link between art and MS in your music. What do you think is the link?
Well, at a very simplistic and egocentric sort of thing, it's a coping mechanism, really. It allows me to it gives me an outlet for feelings and expressing myself. It also means that I get to hang out with some pretty cool people. You rarely find a dud amongst the art and music world. They're really nice people. And,
right. Yeah. And what about, because we all know that stress is the big enemy of MS. Would you see your art and music as a way of you managing stress?
Oh, I think whether you're got MS or not, those are two things that are great for just managing the stress of modern living. So yeah, absolutely. I don't think you need to be, you don't need to be suffering from anything to find good things in music and art.
Right.
Yeah.
And you're just saying before about you never find a dud in the art and music world. Does that mean that there's a lot of support out there?
Oh, absolutely. I think here in the Wairarapa particularly, we're very well looked after in terms of support at just at the funding level with creative communities and the Masterton Lands Trust. We're very fortunate that some forefathers had the foresight to set that trust up with the two goals of supporting education and the arts. That's a huge advantage that we have. We've got a fantastic art gallery with Aratoi. We've got things like Con Art, which is next door to Aratoi. We've got King Street Arts. We've got Tipa Tugi Tugi. We've got this arts quarter starting to develop at the north end of town. I think we're very fortunate here. Music, it's probably the poorer cousin to art. I strongly believe that we need to put a bit more funding into encouraging musicians. We've got some really good, talented, especially young kids. I'm just blown away every time I go to a concert where some teenage kid gets up and just blows everyone off the stage. So we could do a lot more, I think, in that regard. It's not bad, but we could do more. Yeah. Right.
That's great. One of the things, and I'll ask one more question before we go to the music. I'm probably harping along the same lines here, but given that once again you said there's no duds in the art and music world, does that mean that art is a total level playing field? When you say in your work world you weren't able to maintain the standard that was required of you, but whereas with art and music that there is no differentiation?
Well, there is, and I still think there are people who are practicing art and music at a significant level above everyone else, and good on them. But at the same time, the general population can participate in art and music at whatever level they're at,
Right.
and it doesn't really matter. I mean, it's just the fact that you're engaged and wanting to say something, you've got something to say. And I think that's just terrific. You can't underestimate how important that is.
Right. Yep.
And I think particularly for kids these days growing up, trying to navigate their way through the school system, the fact that a lot of schools neglect the art side of things, art and music tends to be a bit secondary to science, engineering and maths. I think it's really sad when I see whole departments in schools shutting down like that. So give these kids an opportunity to find where they're happiest, and in the future I think the world needs more artists, because we need people who actually think creatively about solving problems. We don't need a whole lot of technical qualified people. We need people who can actually think outside the square and actually come up with really innovative ways of meeting our problems. Anyway,
Right.
it's my personal view.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Thank you, Nick. Now, would you like to introduce your last track?
Oh yes, this is a group called the Long Riders. They were pretty active back in the 70s, and I think that it's been 40 years since they've made a record, and this came out last year, and the record's called Psychedelic Country Soul, and this is the title track off that album, and it's I think the title says it all.
Okay, that's great. We'll listen to it now. Another great track, Nick. Thanks for that. Now, just something that I thought we might talk about now, if you are happy to do that. You sort of, at the beginning, sort of voiced what would seem a little bit of frustration about the fact that you have a primary or a progressive form of MS, whether it's primary or secondary, but there's not so much available as of, say, disease-modifying therapies, for instance, in New Zealand, if you have a progressive. Do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, sure. The problem with progressive is that because the disease has done its dash, it has ceased being active, whatever it is, and still no one really knows. Because it's no longer active, all that's happening for those with progressive is that scar tissue is gradually building up around the lesions on their nerves, which puts more pressure on the nerve itself, but also puts pressure on the adjoining ones. And they may have been, the brain may have, or the body may have started using those to communicate. And so with more pressure on, and that's why heat and humidity affect MS sufferers quite badly, because that causes everything to swell up. And again, more pressure comes on those troublesome little areas. And so we don't, so that the gradual progression and the deterioration is caused by a build-up of scar tissue around the lesions over time. So there is nothing that medical science can do for you.
Right, yep.
So whereas with the relapsing and remitting form of the disease, which is where the disease is still active and it's attacking and then relapsing and then remitting and then attacking again and then remitting, and gradually over time, if you can reduce the severity of those attacks and also the frequency, then you've got a better outcome for the patient. And so there are drugs that will do that. And those are now funded by Pharmac, whereas a little while, not long ago, they were still only available if you're willing to pay for it or travel to another country where it was done as part of the national health system.
Right.
So New Zealand lagged well behind the rest of the world when it came to relapsing and remitting, and it still lags behind the rest of the world when it comes to progressive, and that's very frustrating. I know Pharmac has got a certain amount of money to spend, and that's it, and they've got to make adjustments about who gets what. But when there's nothing else available to treat progressive forms of MS, it just seems inhuman to deny us access to drugs outside of the knowledge of the medical fraternity. And I'm talking about medicinal cannabis particularly here. There are drugs that are based on medicinal cannabis that are effective in treating progressive. One of them is called Sativex. It's also very useful in treating epilepsy in kids and a number of other diseases. But Pharmac won't fund it. It's cost prohibitive for most people with MS. Would need to spend somewhere between $1,200 and $1,500 a month for Sativex if they can get it prescribed, which is a rigmarole in itself, which involves getting approval from a neurologist and then to the Ministry of Health, and then it goes on and on. It's very complicated. From the 1st of April, it may be a little less complicated because from 1 April, the medicinal cannabis regulations will come into force, and I'm hopeful that out of that will come freer access to some of these drugs that are more plant-based and natural and not created by a lab and Pharmac and not Pharmac, Big Pharma.
Right.
The big pharmaceutical companies who charge absolute moonbeams for their output. So that's a long-winded way of saying, I really think we're maybe on the cusp of making life a bit better for a lot of people not just with MS, because medicinal cannabis is used in the treatment of a number of different diseases, and epilepsy and various other autoimmune diseases, certain kinds of arthritis. There's a huge list of people who are suffering unnecessarily just because the powers that be are resistant to change and conservative, and just don't put themselves in other people's shoes often enough to realise.
Right.
So,
well, thank you. Thank you for that. I just want to go back. It was really interesting, something that you said, and I sort of want to pick up on it, about that you're obviously very well read about the thing, but also that, there, to a certain extent, New Zealanders behind the game with medications for forms of progressive MS. If you lived in another country, is there any medication that would be available to you that isn't available here?
Well, yes, I think there are some, and they may be available in New Zealand, but they're not funded by
Right.
Pharmac, and that tends to mean that they're unaffordable to most patients. That's a whole other area of concern to me, is that people with MS who get it early in their lives, like in their 30s, can be just given a sickness benefit for the rest of their lives to try and survive on. And it's just hand to mouth, very difficult to. They certainly can't afford to spend money on drugs that would be helpful to them. And so you compare that with some irresponsible person crashes their car and is paraplegic or whatever. They'll be looked after by ACC to the nth degree, but somebody through no fault of their own gets this horrible, or not even MS, but anything related to neurological disease or disorder, and is effectively stopped from working, becomes a sickness beneficiary, and that's just unbelievable in this modern era that we treat them so badly. Anyway, that was a divergence, so I didn't mean to go there.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, I think we're, all aware of the absolute inequity in New Zealand, and, I'm always amazed myself how people who are on the sickness benefit, or whatever you want to call it, get terribly excited when they get to 65, because they're going to get a massive pay rise when they go on superannuation, and we all know that superannuation's not enough, so imagine how low that benefit is. So, Nick, here's your last chance. Is there anything else you'd like to add? In a couple of minutes left, anything that you think that...
Okay, just on a local base, from a local point of view, we lack a range of live music venues in the Wairarapa. There's a few little bars and things that do support local musicians, but we need a few more, and maybe even some sort of council or creative communities funded space that is available to encourage young upcoming musicians, to give them a place to perform. So that would be number one on my Christmas wish list.
Right, yep.
Some of that's personal interest, but actually I enjoy going to gigs just as much as I enjoy playing. And we miss out on a lot of artists who just bypass the Wairarapa because there isn't we don't have a King Street Live anymore, and so we need something to replace it. Maybe not exactly like that, but something similar.
Yes, there's a real hole being left by King Street Live closing, hasn't it?
Yeah. So it'd be nice if the local community lands trust or somebody could come up with a new venue for us to showcase both local talent, but also bring in touring acts and give them a place to perform.
And in the meantime, how's your playing getting on, your guitar playing?
Well, I'd say it's slowly improving, but it's pretty... I mean, if I practice regularly, I do notice that I'd get better. So it's just a matter of being very diligent about the practice.
So a little while till you put on your first performance then.
Yes, that's sometime in the future, yes.
Hey, well, look, thank you so much, Nick. It's been wonderful talking to you today, and it's certainly given us all a lot to think about. So thank you very much, and goodbye, everyone. And just remember, live well with your MS.